I don't think anybody knows what Mr. Trump actually intends to do. I think I I think he doesn't have to look up to Putin anymore. I mean, he's coming in at a level feeling very confident from the election, and he can see that the Russians are in big trouble.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot, and we are catching up with senior retired American General, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. Ben was Commander US Army Europe from 2014 to 2017. He's also commanded in Iraq and Afghanistan and is a regular commentator here on Frontline. We are talking on Thursday, the 21st of November at 5 o'clock London time. Ben, great to see you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kate, and I always appreciate the privilege.
Ben, we're talking on a day where there's been a lot of confused reporting about exactly what Russia fired at Dnipro. At first, Kyiv's Air Force was and the news wires were going wild, speculating that it might have been an intercontinental ballistic missile, and President Zelensky had said there were the characteristics of one, and that would have been presumably very serious if it was the first time that was used in the war. What can you tell us about what President Putin has just been saying about this?
Well, I think this demonstrates that we should be not so quick to make assessments of what happened, why did it happen, what are the implications, because it's still developing. And what you've just reported is different from what we all thought we knew even half an hour ago. So the fact
So
is,
he's saying it's
Russia,
a mid-range ballistic missile.
medium range. That's correct.
Medium range, sorry.
That's okay. So, I think most people who, when they hear ICBM, you automatically imagine the very worst nuclear holocaust, end of the world, World War III. This is significantly below that. Plus, it obviously did not have a nuclear warhead on it. So, the Ukrainians have been getting hit by nuclear capable weapons for the last almost 3 years with a much higher payload. So, they're pretty nonplussed about this. I think we see this as opportunity. Okay, this is the new weapon, the Patriot missile defense system. What have we learned from this particular Russian missile that we need to know that will help it be able to help Patriot shoot down the next one if there is another one? So I think the main thing is that we don't overreact.
And why do you think President Putin would come out and clarify this? Because I would have imagined it would suit him to sit back and enjoy all the confusion.
Um, well, again, he has a domestic audience as well, and there will probably be some people in Moscow that would be horrified. I mean, you that something could go terribly wrong, or maybe he's wanting to say, "Hey, look, I just took it up one step. I can still do more." Uh, I think we have to assume that anything that comes out of Moscow is generally said for a reason, and but there's different audiences that could be targets. Um, I don't know.
But you do regard it still as an escalation.
Well, it's an escalation in that it's a uh, look at the reaction it got. Now, I think what we need to do is avoid. I saw a Daily Mail headline already that said, you know, launches nuclear capable weapon as if like, oh my God, this is something new and horrible. And they've been using nuclear capable weapons from the very beginning. Every time they fire an Iskander, that's a nuclear capable weapon, as are many other weapons that they've used. So that kind of language is all it does is feed into the Kremlin narrative and it gets people excited. But people like you that are much cooler about this and give and help explain to your audience, that's what we need.
Yeah, and Ben, I mean, I said the time and the day at the beginning of this interview because news comes out all the time on this, and who knows what will have come out by the time this is actually being viewed by people. Changing situation all the time. You said earlier, yeah, it's whatever it is, it's an escalation, and it is being regarded as a retaliation for the use of ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles to strike targets inside Russia after restrictions were eased on their use. You've been pushing for this relentlessly. Does this go far enough for you?
You mean what the United States and UK have done?
Yeah, what is being allowed now.
No, not at all. These half measures only provoke the Russians, and that's why they did what they did to say, look, we're serious. You can't allow Ukraine to defend itself. I mean, that's what they're saying, that we are not allowed to help Ukraine defend itself. So to say, when the Russians will claim that they have no choice, that this RBM was launched in retaliation for the U.S. and UK providing ATACMS and Storm Shadow, it is obviously the completely wrong way to frame what's happening here. They don't want Ukraine to be able to defend itself. They don't want us helping Ukraine defend itself. And I think what we should be doing is now doubling down and giving them everything they need and enable Ukraine to target the places from which these attacks are coming.
When you say everything they need to be able to attack the places from where they're coming, what more do you want Ukraine to have?
Well, first of all, remove the restrictions on where they can employ weapons that we give them. And then find more ATACMs, more Storm Shadow. This is something that should have been done a couple of years ago. Don't give them the chance to set the tone or steal the narrative about what's going on here. I remain 100% convinced that Russia is not going to use a nuclear weapon because there is no benefit for them to use a nuclear weapon. All they can keep doing is trying to kill innocent Ukrainians using kinetic weapons like this. Whereas if they use a nuclear weapon, there are zero upsides for them. And so I think that we should, now is the time to be resolved, to show resolve, to stick with Ukraine. Ukrainians are not worried about this, by the way. I mean, there's all kinds of commentary coming out of Ukraine with their typical sort of humor. And I think that, we should not start to waver now just because Russia did this. That's exactly what they want.
And when you say that this new announcement, the allowing of TACMs to be used within the Kursk area, I mean, I suppose we don't actually know what the real restrictions are because they haven't actually been announced, have they? But do you think, I mean, when you've seen what's happened so far, the targeting of the artillery depot in Bryansk and the targeting of the concentrations of North Korean and Russian troops in Kursk, and you're saying that irrespective of that, it's not allowing Ukraine to defend itself. What do you think the point is and what the gain is here? Is it military? Is it political? What is it?
So, of course, the benefit of long range precision weapons is that Ukraine can use them to destroy headquarters, logistics, artillery, the things that are necessary to enable the mass, which is the Russians' only advantage, mass tens of thousands of troops. They have to have headquarters, artillery, and the logistics, ammunition for that artillery in order to help this massed infantry move forward. So this is why precision is so important, and the ability to reach a place like this ammunition storage site in Bryansk, or apparently a headquarters that was hit yesterday by several storm shadows. These are exactly the kind of targets that Ukraine needs to be able to hit to defend what they have achieved in the Kursk bridgehead. Now, the other things that they would want to hit, of course, and which I think we should be helping them hit, are the sites from which these air raids originate, whether they're missiles or aircraft carrying missiles or drone strikes. Their point of origin needs to be hit. In other words, as General Breedlove says, it's better to kill the archer than try to intercept all the arrows.
And it is being framed by some commentators as, a move by President Biden in the last remaining weeks of his presidency to do something, to be seen to do something, perhaps also to hand something for when the new Trump presidency takes over that could potentially be used in any kind of negotiations as some kind of leverage. Do you see it that way at all?
I think there's two or three things that are at play here. I have been frustrated all along, as have many others, that the administration did not do more sooner to help Ukraine to be more decisive instead of this very, very gradual approach, sometimes referred to as escalation management. And look where we are. All it has done is actually prolong the conflict. So I think now that President Biden is looking for an opportunity to try and do as much as he can in the last 2 months to clear the decks of everything that's already been approved, get that out, get that delivered, and policies such as allowing Ukraine to be able to defend themselves more effectively. And I do see this as basically a gift from the Biden administration to the incoming Trump administration, because that means when President Trump shows up, capabilities will be at a higher level than they have been. And then it's up to Mr. Trump. He can change it back, he could cancel it, or he can leave it in place because actually he will have enormous leverage over Vladimir Putin from day one. I mean, he can say, "Hey, look, we're gonna stop. We're gonna block your ability to ship oil to China and India, which is what pays for Russia's war machine. We haven't done that yet." Or he can say, "I'm going to give the Ukrainians all the ATACMS that we have," or he can do a lot of things if he wants to. So I don't think anybody knows what Mr. Trump actually intends to do. I think it's I think he doesn't have to look up to Putin anymore. I mean, he's coming in at a level feeling very confident from the election, and he can see that the Russians are in big trouble.
And what do you think is at stake in Kursk? Will the battle there and whoever holds it by Christmas be critical for any negotiations that take place in 2025?
Well, for sure, this is something I think one of the objectives of the Kursk counteroffensive was to create a dilemma for the Kremlin, that to have Ukrainian soldiers occupying a part of Russian territory, especially a part that's named Kursk, is significant because they can't just ignore it. And I think it's going to end up being a place where a lot of Russian troops and North Korean troops end up getting killed. Perhaps they'll eventually eliminate this bridgehead at some point. The deadline has already been missed twice, and Putin established a third deadline, I think January 20th, which is the U.S. inauguration, to have it done by then. I imagine the Ukrainians will hold on to it as long as they can, as long as it's worth it for the purpose of having something in hand when it does come down to negotiating time, if we're headed there.
We hope you're enjoying today's episode of Frontline. Don't forget you can also now listen to Frontline in podcast form. Just search for The World in 10 from wherever you get your podcasts, where you can also hear daily analysis of the biggest stories relating to war and defence. And we'll put a link to The World in 10 in the description below.
Just want to ask you about Vladimir Putin signing off of his new nuclear doctrine, lowering the threshold for a nuclear attack by Moscow, which coincided with the use of the ATACMS in Russia. I think I know what you're going to say about it. You can say it anyway, but I'm really interested to know whether that kind of rhetoric, if you take it as, saber rattling to push back and scare countries from supporting Ukraine more, for example, perhaps Germany, and be more cautious. I mean, how is that going to pan out? First of all, do you accept that? And is it having an effect? And then secondly, when Donald Trump comes in as president, do you think we're still going to hear that same kind of rhetoric?
Well, these are great questions. First of all, the concept of nuclear doctrine is important because it drives training, it drives strategic messaging, it drives weapons and equipment procurement and development. And Putin, even though he is a total autocrat, he also has a domestic audience. And there are a lot of people in Moscow that were clamoring for do more, lower the threshold, show that we're tough. So he actually, I think, part of this is aimed at that domestic audience to show that he still is the tough guy. Um, I'm very interested of what the relationship will be between him and President Trump after January the 20th. Putin has actually been pretty quiet. Um, Unlike many other world leaders, he's stayed off the net. I think he's confused or trying to figure out what a Trump administration will be like. Just like we all are. looking at the people that are being nominated for various positions, and trying to look at who's the number two person in all those cabinet posts that will really be the ones driving policy, in my view. Um, so I think he's probably having to deal with the uncertainty of Donald Trump right now.
In terms of the appointments that we know that his choices so far, Donald Trump as president, or president-elect for now, what can you read into how policy will be adapted or pursued or developed for Ukraine?
Well, of course, I have my great hope for the administration actually lies in the Congress. The senior Republican leadership is by and large pro Ukraine, pro NATO, pro transatlantic, and I think that they will be in a place that they could actually moderate or influence um, U.S. policy towards Ukraine, U.S. policy towards Russia. That's certainly what I am anticipating. I think they'll be able to convey that. Look, don't turn your back on Ukraine. This is important for us. It affects our economy. It affects how China views our will. All of these things. So that's what I'm counting on is the Congress to play a role. Now, obviously, from the campaign, Vice President-elect Vance was a very harsh critic of Ukraine. Elon Musk, other people that are advisors or friends of the president also were that. But the Secretary of State nominee, Senator Rubio, is very pro-Ukrainian. I think that Congresswoman Stefanik, who will be the U.S. ambassador to the UN, reasonable. So I'm less worried there. Um, what I what's going to be interesting to see is when these nominees do go before the Senate for confirmation hearings, and of course the administration would like to avoid some of that. But this is going to be a test for the Senate to fulfill their constitutional duty, or do they forfeit power?
And of course, the election of Donald Trump has raised questions in Europe as to how it will continue to support Ukraine should the US want to stop doing so. Which European leaders do you think, and are you looking to be the most persuasive towards the president when he comes into his job?
I think that there's kind of a shift of the center of gravity of security and defense in Europe that's moving towards the east, and it would be leaders like Alex Stubb from Finland, Donald Tusk from Poland. I think Prime Minister Meloni from Italy is a real force. And I believe that after the elections in Germany in February, we're going to see Friedrich Merz as the new Bundeskanzler. Um, I think he will change the trajectory of Germany when it comes to security policy. And so it's sort of that tier of leaders that if they come together could probably make a compelling case to a Trump administration that look, don't turn your back on us. We still need an American nuclear deterrent, particularly since none of those four countries have nuclear weapons, unlike UK and France. But they all are, or three of the four, are investing heavily in defense. Italy will soon be one of the biggest spenders on the continent. So they could compel or convey to the president, don't turn your back on us, but we will pick up a lot of the slack on Ukraine, but we still need American leadership. Obviously, Prime Minister Starmer is always going to have will be at the front of the line or close to the front of the line when it comes to people that the Americans turn to. But I have to say, he doesn't come across as um, someone that could lead the rest of Europe, perhaps. And President Macron also seems to be in some his own domestic challenges, and so that's why I feel like the center of gravity is shifted to the east.
And all of this, and you have said so before, that China is watching. You've made that point often, watching the support the West gives to Ukraine, the extent to how it pushes back against Russian aggression. It will also be interested in the terms of any negotiations that it's agreed to end the war. At this stage, what do you think its assessment is?
At this stage, I think China believes that we don't have the political will to decisively stop Russia. That we have we have failed to deter Russia from continuous airspace violations, sabotage of cables, disinformation, um, just this constant churn of bad behavior by the Russians, and we've done is shake our fist at it. We've done nothing to inflict real pain. We've done nothing to stop Russia from exporting oil and gas to China and India. And so I think that the Chinese must see that we still don't have the political will to do what's necessary to help Ukraine win, to defend sovereignty, to defend freedom of navigation, to defend international law. And I think the Chinese could draw the conclusion that we won't have that will in the Indo-Pacific region either, where it's much more difficult to actually do anything.
And since you mentioned undersea cables, the suspicion has fallen on a Chinese ship in the area of the Baltic Sea when undersea internet cables were damaged a couple of days ago. Not the first time that the Baltic's infrastructure has been damaged. It happened in 2022 with the destruction of the 3 Nord Stream pipelines between Russia and Germany. It's really important, though, isn't it, to find out who or what was responsible for these kind of incidents, because otherwise there's never any accountability. There's a plausible deniability, and I'm just wondering how that is possible and how you do it. You can point the finger with credibility when you've got one part of the world saying black is white and the other side saying white is black.
Well, and there are other incidents where the cable between mainland Norway and Svalbard Island was also cut. I mean, these things are happening so often. I was speaking to officers earlier today from Scandinavian countries, and they are very familiar with the Russian tactic of having a submarine that moves underneath a ship to avoid detection. And they get out there, and we know the Russians have the capability to deploy even smaller submarines to cut cables to do this kind of thing. And so the awareness is greater, and they're investing time and resources into protecting this underwater infrastructure, but it's very difficult. And I think that what we're going to see is increased cooperation among the Baltic nations. Um, but I think we need to be more uh, we need to be tougher in our accusation. This is not a criminal court where you've got to have, you know, incontrovertible evidence that it was Russia or that it was China. The fact is, one of those two is associated with every one of these things. Now, I was impressed. Reports yesterday that the Danish Navy went out and approached the Chinese ship. I heard today, I can't confirm it, that the Danish Navy actually boarded this ship. This is what we need is for allies in the region to be willing to take those kinds of steps to hold them accountable. We may get it wrong a couple of times. So what? The fact is, they need to. Right now, they don't fear that they'll ever be caught.
Just really interested to get your perspective on the US agreement to supply anti-personnel landmines to Ukraine, which could slow Russia's advances in the east of Ukraine. It has been heavily criticized by humanitarian organizations. They say they were banned in 1997 by the Mine Ban Treaty. Why can they, and are they being offered now?
Well, I think that you have to look at the situation. Ukraine is fighting for its life. It has a very long border with an enemy that has tens of thousands of troops and is seemingly willing to keep expending those troops, trying to overwhelm Ukrainian defenders. I think this is entirely a legitimate use of a weapon to defend themselves against Russia. And I think that the biggest concern about various types of landmines is that if they stay in the ground forever, or that if there's a high dud rate or something like that, that you end up creating a real safety hazard for farmers, for children. All true. That's absolutely true. There is a danger to that. There's no denying that. I would say that what has been provided are a type of capability that has a very low dud rate. It is not the worst case. But I can feel, even as I'm trying to explain it, people will be going like, "What?" So there's no denying that there will be a risk. But at this point, this is where you say the greater importance is helping Ukraine defend itself against Russia and its unprovoked attack.
And it's 1,000 days since February the 24th, 2022, or just over this week. It was an opportunity to reflect on the devastation, the suffering that's being caused in all of those days. 1 million people have been killed and wounded. And I was listening to a young woman the other day on the streets of Kyiv, and putting it bluntly, just saying that everybody knows somebody who's been killed or who's been maimed by this war. And you don't just get you can't get it unless you're actually living through this. And in Russia itself, the Times newspaper, that it's reporting that Russians are turning to alcohol, and that they've had a record 1.84 billion liters of vodka being sold between January and October this year. Now, and you can say that they're not comparable, those kinds of suffering, but it does look like everybody is losing right now.
Well, yes, in a way, I can see why you would say it like that, but I would not say that Russians are turning to alcohol. I mean, they're pretty famous for that having been a part of their lifestyle and culture for a long time. Nonetheless, the biggest loser will be the country that fails to defend itself, and for us who don't help Ukraine defend themselves. This war started 100% because Russia invaded it. This was unprovoked, and I think we have to think about what really is important for us. If Ukraine fails, there will be millions more Ukrainian refugees going into Western Europe. If Ukraine fails, the continued disruption of grain and oil and gas shipments will continue to affect prices in UK, in the US, and across Europe. If Ukraine fails, you could end up in a situation where NATO countries come face to face with Russia, which means a broader war. And if Ukraine fails, it will be because we allowed it to fail. And the Chinese will say, okay, the West does not have the political will to defend what it claims is so important.
And you've made the point that the real date is more than 6,600 days since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. That was when you were Commander US Army Europe. Did you ever foresee at that moment the potential for this to become what it looks like it is today, is an era-defining conflict?
Well, of course, I did get called out after I tweeted that number that my math was off by a couple of thousand days,
Oh,
which is true. But yes, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, and I think it's important that we date the beginning of this conflict from 2014 because Ukraine has been fighting against Russian forces since that time, and the large scale invasion, of course, is when it got to such high intensity began in February 22. So thank you for reminding that this war has been going on quite a long time. I did not um, I couldn't tell or didn't realize it would be going on 10 years later when it started in 2014. I was pretty sure that the Russians were never ever going to live up to any agreement under the Minsk process. I mean, we saw that. We had American, British, Canadian troops that were in Ukraine helping to train Ukrainians beginning back as early as I think 2015. So we were watching this. In fact, we even changed our own training because we saw what the Ukrainians were dealing with against the Russians. So it caused us to change how we approached war fighting and to help kind of shake us out of our um, counterterrorism mindset. But I didn't. I think I did not anticipate the ferocity of the air and missile strikes against civilian targets that we have seen.
You're obviously, as I said at the beginning, you're retired from your post now, retired general. What keeps you supporting Ukraine? What motivates you to be a strong advocate?
Well, obviously, their story, what we see of Ukrainians, the resilience of the population, their determination, that's inspiring. But what keeps me focused on it is what I had said earlier about why this is important for us, why this is important for the United States, for the UK, for the rest of Europe. This the refugees that will come pouring in and will affect the European economies, the potential for a war spreading to include NATO countries, which means all of us will then be in it. The perception by China, all of these things have long-term ramifications for our security and our prosperity. Ukraine is bearing the brunt of this, and all we have to do is decide we want them to be successful, and I think that's what we ought to be doing.
Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, thank you so much for talking to us. Our audience always loves seeing you and hearing your thoughts. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for the privilege, Kate.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.